Welcome to Over Underrated. This is I, Fran, your co-host of your favourite music podcast, and this week we're talking about prog rock. Some of you will be throwing up, some of you will be delighted. We have a guest with comedian writer Joz Norris, and we will be discussing Marillion and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Stay tuned to find out which we think is over and underrated.
Oh, hang on. Yeah, what are we calling this podcast?
Was it over underrated?
Over underrated. Sous-évalué. Überschätzt. Överunderskattad. Over underrated.
Welcome to another episode of Over Underrated. I am Babs, and I'm here with my co-host Fran on a sunny day, I see, for the both of us. How are you, Fran?
It is a sunny day in Bournemouth. I am fine. It's nice to do a daytime record for the first time in ages. What have you been listening to this week, Babs?
Well, Fran, we are recording this 3 days after Eurovision, so a lot of Eurovision-related content, a lot of feeling sad at the way Finland were robbed. I know that Sweden was high on your list, but surely you agree that the public were correct and the juries weren't.
I think people are very angry about Sweden, aren't they? People are crying it's a fix because of ABBA can come back for the 50th anniversary. I'm not too sure if it's that big a thing to...
No, but I think what I realised this week is like there's different camps of Eurovision people, and there are the people who are like, oh, but we want the lovely pop songs to win, and it's like, that is a bit of what Eurovision is about, but it's also about lunatic Finnish men in lime green cha-cha-cha arms, okay, guys? And I think just everything surrounding him. He's such a nice guy, such a charismatic guy. I'm going to Finland later this year, and I'm actually wondering if they're going to start selling kind of Carrier-inspired merch. But just to move away from Eurovision, because we've done a lot of Eurovision content,
of course.
I have also been listening to the new IMX album, Fault Lines, and I'm quite obsessed with the song Radical Self-Love, which I sent to you, but I don't think you've had a chance to listen to yet.
I have not. I do apologise. I've been caught up in the Eurovision bubble myself. But I have also had time to listen to the new Hive single.
Oh, yeah, I've seen lots of stuff about the single and the tour, so what's it like?
I mean, shock, it's very Hives. Okay. But Hives are quite clever, and they only released an album every 5 years. So you forget, oh yeah, the Hives are back, and they sound like the Hives, so I'm happy that the Hives are back. I haven't seen their new image, because they tend to have a look that they put album. So I don't know what sort of thing, if they're doing polka dots or what's happening in the world of the Hives for this tour. But yeah, if you're a Hives fan, you will be pleased.
Yeah, I think they're coming to Brussels on one of the dates, and I'm not sure yet if I'm going to go and see them, because I did see them recently in Antwerp, but we will have to see.
And we're not alone in the podcast today. We have a guest. We have comedian, writer, performer. I can go on, but we have Joz Norris.
Those are the main ones, I think. The other ones are just sort of like, I don't know, he's got a house plant, so you can say gardener. He's cooked tofu once, so you could say chef.
Your bars are very low for labels, Joz. I like it.
Yeah,
I like it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I won't call you Chef Norris throughout the podcast.
No, please don't. I think it would be overdoing it.
And what have you been listening to, Joz?
I've been listening to. I've been doing a bit of Eurovision listening, but mainly to Sam Ryder's new single, Mountain, which he performed in the interval. And I'll be honest, I was disappointed in this year's Eurovision. I think Mountain is incredible. It's one of the best songs of the year. It's an absolute banger. I think it'll be the song of the summer. But it's the only song from this year's Eurovision that I could sing you.
Whoa.
I mean, Joz, can you not sing cha 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 cha?
I can't remember cha cha cha.
God.
I can remember the visuals. I remember the green man dancing away with his arms and all the pink people coming out of the box.
And po 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 po, po 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 po.
Oh yes, they were the Edgar Allan Poe one. They're like, who the hell is Edgar or whatever. I do remember. I remember sort of things like fragments and images, but I can still sing you 5 or 6 of the entries in the 2018 Eurovision from start to end, because I think it was the best Eurovision there's ever been.
Interesting.
And it was also my first one, which I think might mean I'm attaching nostalgia to it. But also, I think maybe we were just spoiled that year, and we've never had one since with so many bangers. And I didn't feel there were that many bangers this year.
Jules, you have no idea how controversial you're being on this
Really?
podcast. Yes.
What did you love? You loved it.
Well, to be fair, so we record a Eurovision special every year, so this is a great opportunity to plug it. So the last 3 years, Fran and I listened to all the songs beforehand. Without watching the videos, knowing the countries, and then watching the performances, and we pick our 5 favorites and our 5 least favorites. And I have to say that this year, Fran and I went in being like, last year was better. But I think what happened this year, and I think it happened to both of us, is the social media surrounding Eurovision has just become so much bigger. There's just so much content because all the performers are on social media. There was BBC doing it, but also all these blogs. So I feel like even not wanting to, I was getting pushed all these videos of like, Eurovision 2023 being crazy, or I watched an 8-minute video of the Belgian entry doing an interview with Clara Amfo, being interviewed about his hats, stuff that I would never care about before. And by the end of it, I was really into it, and I would say there are 8 or 9 songs now that I really like. But
wow.
I think it's algorithmic stealth. It's 2018.
That was, I can't remember who won. But it was Netta won, I think.
Netta won, yeah.
Germany's entry, Norway's entry, Sweden's entry seared on my mind. Alexander Rybak returned and did That's How You Write a Song.
Yeah, he did.
Michael Schulte did a beautiful song about his mum called You Let Me Walk Alone or something. And Benjamin Ingrosso did a really cool song called Dance You Off, where he did a really cool dance move that I spent about 2 months trying to learn. And those 3... They're still there. They're still there all this time later.
Speaking of weird, crazy music, we are discussing prog rock in this episode. And before we announce the bands, Babs, what's your thoughts on prog rock? Are you a fan? Do you own any artists? Let me know.
Do I own any artists? Yeah, in my sex dungeon down the hall. So prog rock is a genre I don't really dip into that much. I would say I don't dislike it, but I don't seek it out that much because you need somewhat of an attention span, right? And I don't always have it. My mum was far more into it, like Genesis, one of her favourite bands, and the Overrated band we're talking about also she was a fan of. So I remember listening to a few things around the house. But it's not, especially within rock, which is maybe my favourite genre, it's not a subgenre of rock that I know that well. How about you?
So, yeah, I like the idea of prog rock. Like, I don't mind if it's got structure and people are writing melodies for a reason. I'm all for it. If it's just them to show how fast they can play, no, thank you. It's why like some metal doesn't really work for me because it literally is I can drum really fast. I can play this riff really fast, and it's like it's not a sport. like what do I get out of this? So. Yeah, certain prog I'm happy with, and I kind of like I guess modern bands with a prog hint, like Manson. We've spoken before.
King Gizzard, I have enjoyed. Yeah,
Brit Seeper, even Simple Minds, Pure Reason Revolution. So I don't mind it. It influencing bands, but it's crazy looking back at the 70s, thinking that the artists we're going to talk about are like top of the pops, if we're using like top 5, like what the fuck happened? Like, imagine these days, like these bands being on TikTok or people going crazy for like, a band.
I'd join TikTok for that.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, is it just because, we've just ended up in a world where radio has to play a certain sound in a certain formula, and back then you just could have like, a random classical jazz piece on the radio and people wouldn't think twice. I mean, I wasn't around in 1972, so I can't say, but it does seem like, well, maybe, if people were, if this was played, maybe the kids would like the prog, But I guess, punk rock has pissed away the word prog rock, and then since then it's like a dirty secret, isn't it? You pass your prog around in a brown envelope to people.
I think kind of the further away we've come from the 70s, it's also like your mum or your dad's music. More than modern music. But I mean, Jos, would you say that prog is one of your favourite genres?
I love prog so much. It's my absolute favourite. And I find it really hard to explain why, because I'm very conscious of how stupid it is. Like I don't look at it and think that it's a serious genre at all. I think it's so weird and so stupid, and that's part of what I love about it. But I don't like it for novelty value at all. Like when I put it on, I genuinely really, really enjoy it. And I think when a prog song gets to a sort of bit where they rock out a lot, I really think it's very cool. But also I'm aware of like the kind of aging prog rockers now who still take themselves very seriously and still think that what they're doing is somehow like serious art. I do think are slightly pathetic. So I don't really know where my like enjoyment of it lies. It's sort of somewhere between genuinely thinking it's really, really great and inventive and cool and weird, and thinking it's a load of total nonsense. But then I think that like a lot of how I approach life has been quite similar to that anyway, in that like I never really know whether I take comedy seriously or whether I think it's a huge, stupid, nonsense, knockabout fun thing. So I think prog sits in that weird middle ground for me where I can't tell exactly why I'm enjoying it, but I like the thought that's gone into it, kind of thing.
Do you remember how were you introduced to prog rock? Was there a band you got into, or was it parents or friends?
I got into Supertramp in my teens because I watched the film The Parole Officer, starring Steve Coogan. I was a big Alan Partridge fan, so when Steve Coogan made a film, I watched that. And they played Dreamer by Supertramp over the opening credits. So then I got into Supertramp off the back of that and realised that a lot of their other stuff was less kind of jaunty pop song than Dreamer, and they did stuff that was a bit more progressive. And then when I got to uni, there was a friend of mine called Jack who was a huge prog fan and a huge classic rock and metal fan, and had been all through his teens. And I think he thought a lot of my music taste was quite lame because I liked, I also really liked ELO. I really liked Elton John. I liked kind of silly pop, basically. But when he found out there was a way to steer me more towards prog, he started making me playlists of like, you should listen to Pink Floyd, you should listen to King Crimson, all this sort of thing. And I think I always kind of viewed it as a little bit sillier than he did. I think he was very much like, no, this is cool music, which I agreed with. But I was also like, this is quite fun. Like, I like that these guys are just messing around. I think it is weird having that time distance to it as well, because like, I don't think any of them in the 70s thought that they were being silly. I think they were all kind of privately educated, very privileged posh boys who knew about classical and jazz and were throwing all that stuff into rock music and thought that what they were doing was absolute genius. And I think when you go to 20 years later, it's possible to enjoy that, but to also be like, this is fucking stupid. This is absolute chaos. I love these guys.
I like how their fans, even to this day, are like, you know, a bit like metal, it is all about the prog. And they're like, like I watched a documentary on the band we're talking about, and, you know, they have like the whole weekend when they were here, that band do like 5 albums in a row, and they'll all be wearing their t-shirts for that band and hailing the world of prog. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the artwork, it's a lot of dragons and aliens, and, you know,
goblins and Vikings and all this stuff. It's so, I think there's a big crossover with just kind of nerddom in general. Like, it's that same thing of, because not many people like it, it means when you find other people who like it, it becomes a really obsessive thing. And for a while, when I was in my 20s and I was going to gigs, I was always the youngest person there by about 30 years, which first they'd be annoyed by. They'd be like, you're a bit young to be here. This is our music. But then also they got really excited by the idea of like, oh, young people like the thing that we like as well. That must mean that actually it is cool and we're not lame nerds in our 50s. And it was always quite sweet, those gigs. There's kind of like there's a real community to it, I think.
Who have you seen out of these bands?
I've seen Jethro Tull, Yes, King Crimson. I saw Roger Hodgson from Supertramp, Roger Waters from Floyd. I've seen most of the big ones because I just loved it, and I thought I'm going to try and find all the ones that aren't dead.
That are still alive.
I will track them down and try and watch them. I've not seen all of them, but as many as I could.
Yeah, so, you know, I was saying that my mum was really into this music. Unfortunately, she's passed away, and I can't ask her what it was like because she was born in 1962. I'm sure if she, some of the stuff I hear from the 70s, I can imagine if she was like 10 years old and heard this, like, it must have blown her fucking mind. And I messaged my dad, who is not into prog rock, and I was like, oh, by the way, you know, I listening to ELP, you must have absolutely hated this because it's not music. And he's like, yes, and I've got your mother's triple vinyl still waiting for you to get a record player, because my dad's still got all my mum's records because I have not yet bought a record player, but the time will have to come.
Overrated.
So, Joz, do you want to introduce your overrated pick?
So I've chosen ELP as my overrated pick, which is Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And I remember watching a documentary about prog when I was first getting into them, and I was trying to learn a bit more about the world, and it sort of did an overview of the whole genre, and it talked about ELP as like they were the poster boys of prog at the time. I think they're less so now. I think now it's like Yes and Genesis and people like that are the ones that are remembered. But I think at the time, because they were a supergroup, so all of them had been in other prog bands and then came together to form a big supergroup. So I think they were really pushed as the poster boys for it. And I think what they do is basically everything that is why prog has a terrible reputation now. I think they're really emblematic of it, because prog is sort of dismissed as like, oh, it's all kind of like technicality for the sake of technicality, and it's long solos, and it's people showing off and how good they are at their instruments and how clever they can be, but it's not actually musically very interesting, which for loads of prog just isn't true. But I think ELP are really guilty of that. They're very self-indulgent.
So, Babs, you briefly mentioned ELP, but had you heard many songs apart from ones that your mum played to you?
No, I hadn't, because I do remember the Emerson, Lake and Palmer album cover, and Joss, I'm glad that you didn't pick Lucky Man, because that song makes me cry my eyes out. So I was like, okay, I'm glad that, Joss has picked a couple of songs from that album, but then going more into their oeuvre, because I really don't know much beyond that. And I wonder, in fact, how much my mum did play, because I think my dad would have had a fit. Of course, I've got to mention that we've talked about Greg Lake before on our episode. We did a special episode, Joz, on our neighborhoods. I knew that their name was kind of synonymous with like the worst of prog, and I didn't know why. I didn't know that a popular joke in the 70s was, how do you spell pretentious? ELP, hardy hardy ha. And I kept reading about their fall from grace, and I was like, what is the fall from grace? And I think it was That Works album, where it was basically like 3 solo albums and then one where they came together, and like, I don't know if you read about that tour, but it sounds absolutely insane. So basically they wanted to do a Works tour with a full orchestra. Right. They only managed to do 10 dates, and they were saying like, yeah, we used to book hotels, not rooms, because there were like 140 people on there. And I think Greg Lake said that it cost them at the time $3 million of their own money. Which is just crazy. Wow. And I think, a lot of the negativity surrounding them kind of seems to come that like it wasn't from the beginning. Because you can't deny, like, especially some of the instruments that they used, they were one of the first. Lucky Man, I think Lucky Man is one of my favorite songs of all time. It's
Lucky
amazing.
Man's a beautiful song.
Absolutely beautiful song. I didn't realize that they'd influenced important Japanese people. So Konji Kondo, who was the Nintendo's first video game composer, said they were a major influence, and Nobuo Uematsu, who did the Final Fantasy series scores, also said they were. And I was like, kind of makes sense, kind of computer games style. But apart from that, I really did not know very much, and wondered, is it that thing of, you touched upon it, Jules, of like, it's privately educated men who are into classical music and jazz. So is it seen as like, oh, it's even if they're not saying it, but just by the nature of, getting inspired by Bartok and Mussorgsky and using weird fucking jazz polyrhythms, is it seen as inaccessible and therefore not for the common man? And that's why they didn't like it. So was it this kind of almost reverse snobbish thing, or was it because their music is shit? I didn't know. And that's how I'm coming into this.
The fact that they had massive hits means that, it wasn't just the posh boys buying the records. It must have been, the everyman. So, but they're famous for having, like, on tour, they had 3 lorries. Each lorry would have the surname of each member on it.
Incredible.
I remember, like, when they did that orchestral tour after date 10, the accountant said, no more, and he had to literally like phone up all the orchestra and say, hi guys, it's like, gonna go home please, we can't afford you. Wow. Because I guess in 1973 they were huge, but as the 70s progressed, the fame went down and down and down. I guess they must have booked those the tour like maybe 6 months to a year before, and didn't realise that the bubble had burst by the time they had an orchestra. But like, have you seen the album covers for their last album before they first broke up? I think it's called Love Beach. It's
Love Beach looks mad. I've never listened to it, and I must, because I think it's fascinating. but they look like the Bee Gees.
Exactly, yeah. And I think I must have seen that cover so many times and not really worked out that, oh, that's fucking ELP. I always assumed it's like some sort of like B disco band. But yeah.
But I don't think it's a piss take, right?
No.
It's not like they're doing a parody of disco. I think they ran out of money and had to make a disco album in the late 70s because disco was popular. So they really panicked and went, okay, we'll do this. And I really need to listen to it one day because the thought of them trying to make that music is so funny that I'm sure that album's dreadful, but I think I would probably really enjoy it.
I'm reading Wikipedia now just to say, and I wonder if it was taken in the Bahamas, that picture, because that's where they recorded it, because they were tax exiles, of course. Of course, like so many good British musicians, it's in the tradition.
Yeah, I mean, Happy Mondays had to record an album because there's no drugs on the island.
Yeah.
They have to record an island to save from tax. That's how different. But I mean, if you actually asked me to name an ELP song, I couldn't. And apart from
Really?
Greg Lake's Christmas hit, that's probably the closest I had to.
Which one's that? Is that? What's it called?
I Believe in Father Christmas.
I believe, yeah.
And then it turns out that, ripping off classic songs is what they do the best.
Just to say, honestly, guys, like, go and look at videos of people reacting to Lucky Man online. Like, whatever you think of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, it is quite moving. Yeah.
It is great. I nearly put it on the playlist because I thought I was being unfair and deliberately choosing.
No. That's the point of this. You're trying to make your case, so...
I put one on there that I really like because I thought I was being too unfair. But then I thought about putting Lucky Man on there, and I think it's too good. It was silly to put it on a band I think is overrated because you just listen to it and go, yeah, these guys are great. So they were capable of good stuff. I really like Greg Lake because I really like his stuff with King Crimson, and I like a bit of his solo stuff. I think Carl Palmer is a great drummer. I think what he brings to them is really impressive. I think Keith Emerson, he strikes me as the problem. I don't really know anything about him. And I think he's a great keyboardist. I think the sounds he creates are fantastic. But so much of what I dislike about ELP is just minutes upon minutes of that guy noodling. And it's everything people don't like about Prog, really.
I watched a documentary on Prog last night, and
it
was his idea to start this band, and he basically quit for Nice because he thought that the vocalist wasn't good enough for his keyboards and wanted someone with a higher range to match his keyboard playing. So yeah, he is the kingpin behind ELP, and he does come across as a bit of a prick. Unfortunately. And I don't know if you've ever seen any live shows on the 70s.
No.
So because he felt stuck behind the keyboards, he then got like a cricket bat with some cables on it, so that he could go around with the cricket bat next to his penis, making a woo 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 sound, so he could prance around the stage. Because obviously, then the focus was on him for once. So yeah, he's a.
So he would literally kind of pretend to wank in front of the audience, and that was. Yeah. But that's already what people think. Big instrumental solos are. They're always like, oh, why do you always have to wank over the whole? But that's somebody literally did that.
different times. So we begin the playlist, Charles. What's your first pick?
The first song I put on there was The Barbarian, which is the first song on the first Emerson, Lake and Palmer album. And I remember when I first listened to it, I think the bass thing that starts it, I really loved. The second it starts, there's a very cool sort of bass tone that Greg Lake does, and that lasts for about 10 seconds, and then Keith Emerson comes in, and it deteriorates very quickly into there's just no tune. There's no kind of musical anchor to it, I don't think. And I think what I really love about Prog is when all the kind of nonsense and the silliness and the showing off and the virtuosity or whatever is there in service of something that's basically musically good. Like there's a good tune in there or a good musical idea in there. And I think The Barbarian is one of those songs where it's all of the kind of virtuosity, but there's nothing actually to, I couldn't sing it to you or hum it to you at all. Same as Eurovision 2023, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could barely hear any bass, and I kept thinking, I know Greg writes the lyrics. Was he writing the lyrics for another song whilst they're creating this piece of music?
There's one note of it or something right at the start, and then it's gone.
Yeah, I just put it down. There's some piano and drums shuffling around. Palmer's going mad. Well, Palmer's drums are going mad while Emerson's testing all of the notes on his keyboard. But then I found out that it's actually stolen from a 1911 piano piece by
Bella Bartok.
And they didn't mention that on the inlay until his wife mentioned it. Can you please credit my husband who wrote it? No, go on then. So Babs?
I fucking love this. I put dirty guitars, mad synths, great drums and time signature changes. What's not to love? Then the guitar riff comes in to change it completely and it becomes more piano-led. And then a gong comes in. The dirty sounds are back. I absolutely love this. But I feel like I'm up against, let's say, two melody men once again. So Joz, Fran and I's
I love a tune.
constant battle is that he is much more into melody and melodic music. And I sometimes find it a bit earnest and grating. So for me, it's not a problem that that I can't hum it again. Every time I listen to it, I was like, I can't wait to listen to it more so that I can actually kind of understand it. And my mum was also a huge fan of Bartok. I even have some sheet music I think that she got from his house in Hungary. So when I saw that it was Bartok, I was like, oh, let's go and look at the original piano piece. And I don't know if either of you did that, but it is batshit, but it's great. Like, even when you have just one person playing the piano, you're already like, this is already so impressive. It doesn't matter to me that you can't really hear the melody. It's not so atonal that it kind of puts me off. So I have to say I didn't enjoy every single song in your playlist, but this one I thought was fantastic.
But were you put off that they didn't bother to reference?
I was like, that just shows, like you said, everything that's wrong with them as a band. They do, I think I was reading an article that said they are 3 alpha males, and it's like, yeah, it does come across like that. Even because they named themselves Emerson, Lake and Palmer because one of them was the most famous and they didn't want to draw too much attention to that, I thought. I will also say, as someone who's based in Brussels, every time I put in ELP without Emerson, Lake and Palmer, it kept trying to direct me to the European Leadership Programme, and I'm like, no, that's not what I'm looking for.
So to your next pick, Joz.
The next pick was, I think, hang on, I need to remind myself of the full name because I think it was one with the
3 Fates. You can just call it the 3 Fates.
Yeah, the 3 Fates. That's it. Yeah. So this is also from the first album. I think this one I forget how much of that first album is adaptations of older classical pieces. Again, this is just noise. This just strikes me as noise, this piece. So Emerson, that first album, the Emerson, Lake and Palmer album, is the one with Lucky Man on it. And I think it's the one redeeming feature on that album. Everything else, I really think is it's just showboating, the whole thing. It's really kind of like tuneless, over the top stuff.
I wonder how many people bought the album after hearing Lucky Man and then played it and went, oh shit.
We got to listen to a lot of this stuff to get through to it.
Didn't they become like really popular because they did like the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970, and they actually had live cannons on stage, as you do, and that was like propelled them on the world stage instantly. And apparently, like I think they were selling 20,000 capacity arenas in America before this album even came out. Wow. Regarding the song, I think I slightly preferred this to Barbarian. It feels like there's a church organ farting, followed by a spaceship landing. There's then a beautiful piano piece of 3 minutes, and then it becomes like a silent movie soundtrack with lots of people running around after each other. And then the end. I like sections of it, but if you again, Josh, I said if you asked me to hum it, I wouldn't. I mean, I probably heard this now 7 times, and I can't remember a single thing. I'm just relying on what I've written down.
I think that's what's annoying is that, like you say, with the sort of the really nice piano bit in it, they're capable of making really nice music, these three, and they're like that because this is mostly a solo Emerson piece, I think. The 3 Fates, and there are moments within it where you go, yeah, this guy can play really well, and this guy can make stuff that sounds really nice. It's just the inability to kind of focus in on something that's meaningful, I think, and the idea of like adding more and more and more. And making it more complicated and more, filling time, it feels like to me.
I know a bit of what Fran thinks about this, but Joz, are you a fan of either classical music or jazz music, or not really?
I really love classical and jazz. My dad and my mum were classical musicians. My dad still does classical piano. My mum now runs choirs that do sort of a selection of like classical and modern things. I don't have a huge technical understanding of it. Like I'm aware of classical music and the world of it, and I really like listening to it. My dad occasionally gets me to read things he's written that are about kind of the technicality of like how a certain piece works, and it all goes right over my head, because I think you have to engage. There's sort of ways of intellectually engaging with music and ways of engaging emotionally with it. And I think to understand chord structure and so on, and to understand a lot of the kind of more complicated things that classical music is doing, you need to have that intellectual understanding of it that I don't really have. Whereas I really like to listen to it and just respond to it, which I think is why I sometimes really like the way prog draws on it, if it draws on it in a way that kind of informs the atmosphere or informs the feeling of a thing. But when I feel like what I'm listening to is somebody who's just really kind of virtuosically showing off about the technical stuff, I feel quite lost, really.
The reason I ask is because I think in both of those genres, again, you need patience, right? Like if you're listening to a whole symphony, if you're listening to a whole 45-minute improvised jazz piece, you've got to kind of sit down and engage. It's not something that you can listen to passively, right?
Yeah.
I love this, guys. I love this. But I do think I love this because my mum listened to classical music like Bartók, like Benjamin Britten, where it's not as much as I like, Bach and Beethoven and all of that. It's like, it is fucking weird. And when you first listen to it, you're like, what is this? And you have to be in the mood for it. It definitely took me back to a time, when she was alive, when she would play this kind of music, and you'd go from like, what the hell is this, to like, ooh. And it's funny because with jazz, I don't really like jazz for that. I think jazz can be a bit too improvised and virtuosic, but I think with classical music, I have a bit more patience, especially because very often it brings in lots of different instruments, as it does here. But yeah, I thought the organ playing was amazing, and how it went from kind of epic to this kind of like Dance of the Bumblebee niftiness. Then segues quite effortlessly into that nice piano piece with some very lush arpeggios. Like, it was a bit jazzy, but there was still some, I've put Bartókness because I also don't technically know what I'm talking about. So it wasn't too jazzy, like it still had some interest for me. And then, the absolute batshit craziness of the third bit where, I went, just the description from Wikipedia, which is like, Emerson is playing a piano vamp in 7/8 with percussion accompaniment. An improvisational section is played on top, which transforms into a polymetrically played repeated sequence in 4/4 time. The resonance of the final chords is curtailed by the sound of explosions. And you're like, okay, what this?
Yeah, no idea what
this. Okay, it's fine. It's I had to look up what a piano vamp was. No idea. But again, I didn't understand it, but it didn't scare me. It made me want to go and listen to it again. But I don't know why this over other prog that I don't like, and especially other jazz that I don't like.
Could you hear any bass at all?
No, in the third part I've put piano, drums, random percussion shoved in. It's what I've written.
Poor Greg.
I wonder whether, like, because I find that when I listen to classical music, one of the things I really like about it is the sense that it's sort of, it's not at all personality led, if you know what I mean. Like, it's very much, you have an orchestra or you have a kind of group of musicians usually playing something by someone who has nothing to do with that recording. And you have the sense that like the music exists as one thing and then these are the people playing it. And I think part of the problem with things like prog and with ELP is that although it's doing stuff that's structurally similar to classical music, I'm so aware of Keith Emerson listening to it. I'm so aware of this guy's ego and the fact that like he's doing this very clever kind of intricately structured stuff, and doesn't that make him very cool and clever and impressive? Whereas you don't get that same thing, I think, with classical music because it's rarely
I guess it
led by personality in the same way.
Although I guess it depends whether you're watching an orchestra or watching like a soloist, right? Because I did go and watch some piano piece, some pianists playing some of the stuff that inspired this. And you see them really get into it. But
they're just as...
but I guess they did not come across as particularly arrogant. And I guess if you do have that in the back of your mind, you're like, you almost don't want him to be very good because he's going to be very pleased with himself. I do understand that. Yeah.
So for your next piece, Joz,
number 3. Oh, number 3 was Jerusalem. This again is another of the kind of revisiting classical pieces. So this is on the Brain Salad Surgery album, which I do think is great. I really like Brain Salad Surgery. It's one of my favorites of theirs. And this is a kind of overblown version of Jerusalem. I quite like this. This is one of the ones where I start to kind of to go a bit easier on them. I think it's conscious of how overblown it is to a certain extent. I think also it completely misses the point of the song. I think so I sort of find it funny. I find there's an amazing version of Yes do a cover of America by Simon and Garfunkel, which is a really kind of like simple, beautiful folk song, and they turn it into a 10-minute extended, overblown prog rock epic. And I love it because it misses the mark completely. And so I think there's a silliness in this song, in that original hymn is very kind of beautiful, very profound, very sort of simple, really. And what they do with it is shout and yell it as loud as they can, then add the most bombastic organ that they possibly can. I don't know if they intended it to be sort of goofy and silly, but that's what I get out of this one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, imagine like if Muse new single was Land of Hope and Glory.
Yeah, just the idea that you can do that on a popular record and go, oh, by the way, we're going to include this thing that was written 60 years ago.
Yeah, this was banned by the BBC.
Really?
Was it?
And there's 3 different sources saying it, but I can't find any source to say it doesn't make sense. Yeah. So, and apparently, Greg Lake was furious that this wasn't played on the radio. But I enjoyed the scattering drum fills of Palmer. It's. I mean, the hymn's fine. It's a nice hymn. I mean, is it better than Cliff Richard's version? But yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the album cover for Brain Salad, which is obviously by H.G. Geiger, who went on to do Alien and Aliens. But I don't know what my opinion is. It's like it is ELP doing Jerusalem, and this is exactly what you expect.
This was one of my least favourite ones because I basically liked the bits that didn't sound like Jerusalem. The bits where it's a straightforward cover of Jerusalem, I was like, ugh, this isn't necessary. But when they do start,
it's so earnest.
Yeah, just it. Jerusalem is not a bad hymn, not a bad song. But yeah, I think Ernest is. It's just it doesn't gel. It feels a bit wrong. But when it's instrumental and when they're trying to kind of go off on one a little bit, I enjoyed it. But yeah, that's what I have to say about it, really. I mean, it was kind of nice to hear a much more straightforward song after the Three Fates, as much as I enjoyed it. But yeah, weird one, this.
What's your next pick?
The next pick is I think I only included the first section. But,
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's half an hour long, this song. But it's the first section of Carnival 9, which this was the one where I felt like I was deliberately choosing things I don't like very much, and it wasn't very fair of me. So I thought I have to acknowledge the fact that they made a piece of music that I think is one of the best prog songs ever made, which is Carnival 9. It's a sort of half-hour epic. I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Eventually, there's a kind of a concept that emerges where it's something to do with a spaceship. There's a bit where a kind of Dalek voice comes in to be like the ship's computer or something. We don't quite get there at this point, but it eventually turns into a kind of huge concept album type thing. I think the tune is great. I think that the kind of the showboating of the solos is genuinely impressive and genuinely cool. I like it a lot.
I watched, as per usual, a documentary on this band. It was when they got back together in like 1991.
Right.
But the album was a flop. but it's before the album came out. And yeah, this is the first song, which makes sense because obviously it has Greg introducing a show.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the co-lyricist Pete Seinfeld, he wrote the lyric as if it's like
the King Crimson lyrics.
Yeah, and he wrote it as if, because obviously Carnival is a joke on the carnival. Mm-hmm. So the lyrics are, as an MC introducing a carnival, like welcome to our show. But I think this is the best song on the list. This is good prog. I've not heard the whole half an hour track.
It's incredible for 15 minutes.
Yes, okay.
The first 15 minutes of it, that 8-minute version that is on here kind of continues for about another 7, and then it completely changes. The second half then goes into this sort of like space age thing, and the tune is sort of left behind, which I think is a shame. But it becomes much more kind of like multi-part and complicated. It's still great. And I think it eventually finds its way back to where it started. Okay. But the first half is the good bit.
Because the melodies that Palmer's playing are brilliant, and again, also Emerson's writing are brilliant, and Palmer again, amazing drum. It's what you expect. But yeah, I did read it was like a shortened history of like a futuristic tale. So yeah, I should probably listen to the whole half an hour, but then it means I can't watch Hollyoaks because it's the same. I guess the same length. So Babs, it's got a lot of melody.
It does. So I've written that I like the discordant piano and tin banging parts, and I like when the bass, the crazy drums or the synths dominate, but there's way too much organ piano, and when there is a lot of organ piano, I do not like it. And again, like with the first two, it is difficult to get my head around. So I tried a couple more listens, but with this one, I think the first two picks energized me. I was like, wow, this is mad, but I love it. With this one, I was like, this feels like work. And I wondered if it was because it was only kind of the first part of this longer epic about computers and about real blades of grass and seven virgins and mad shit. Love that. But I feel like I would only ever revisit this if I was going to listen to the full half hour. This by itself, yeah, I wasn't so keen.
Yeah, it was a shame to only choose part of it. I apologize.
No, thank you, Charles. I will listen to the whole thing in my own time.
Yeah, you can do it once,
time.
and then you've done it, and then you never need to listen to it again.
Exactly.
I mean, it's unfair that we've not been to an ELP concert to witness this live. Do you need to be amongst the audience, sing and play it to really enjoy it?
I think it would elevate it. Like, I'm not a huge fan of jazz, but when I've seen jazz live, you know, it is at the very least interesting to watch the musicians play and interact with each other.
So you've been to a few prog concerts. How are the mosh circles? Yes,
They're very weird. Yeah. Because they're all so old now that usually when prog concerts happen, they're all done in proper concert halls, and all the audience are in their 60s and 70s as well. So it's much less of a kind of, it feels less like a gig.
Is there a lot of shushing?
Kind of like,
That's what I would
basically
imagine.
everyone just wants to kind of quietly enjoy the. When I saw King Crimson, I was the only person who laughed, and I kept laughing because I just found it really. There was a bit where they tried to play a kind of a jazz piece over the top of a kind of three-way metal drums battle, because they have three drummers now, and they kind of fight each other, and then a saxophonist played some jazz over the top, and the whole thing was such nonsense that I burst out laughing at it, and then people around me were going, shush, be quiet, it's very cool and serious, actually, this is great.
So are they saying that, like, in the mid-70s, when Peter Gabriel was putting on those grotesque masks, everyone's going, oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah,
like,
wow.
oh, yeah.
Beautiful at heart.
Yeah, but it's so funny because I do wonder if those people did go to those concerts back in the day, and how they were then and how they are now, I'm sure is very different.
Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, seated concerts, yeah, not a fan.
I'd love to see what happens if I took up my phone. So speaking of live, what's your final track?
The final track is from Pictures at an Exhibition, which is a live album. It's called The Hut of Baba Yaga. And this one was just me trying to find more examples of them doing irritating self-indulgent noise, really. I felt like I really wanted to make my point that that's essentially what I consider a lot of their discography to be. And this one is it's quite kind of clattery. So yeah, this is their kind of version of, I think I get a bit annoyed by the constant kind of, we're doing another reinvention of a classical piece, because I just don't think they improve them most of the time. I think they seem to take that as their template, and then they add a lot of the showboating that we've been talking about, and the kind of, what if we made this even louder and even more intense and over the top? And it just makes me think that I'd rather listen to the piece itself. I don't think it comes from a place of like, we really love this piece and we'd like to adapt it in an interesting way that captures the spirit of it. It's just, wouldn't it be clever and cool if we did that? I think that's the thing that really annoys me, is the constant kind of revisiting of things just to make themselves look like they're kind of improving on a classic, rather than, I don't know, adapting it in a way that feels intuitive.
Is it their egos thinking that they're bringing it to the masses?
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, because obviously if they were doing like, Beethoven or Bach, then obviously people would have known the tracks. But is it the fact that they're doing slightly more obscure? Either they're doing it, either it's because they're thinking people don't know these songs, so we can pretend it's us who wrote it.
Yeah.
Or it's, guys, look what we can show you from our academic classical music classes. Enjoy.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of Hammond organ here, so Babs may not be a fan. There's a lot of stabbing and a lot of drum hits. Again, to me, it soundtracks a chase sequence I can't stop thinking of that. But this is quite a brief track. It's like 1 to 2 minutes. It's like maybe 1 minute 47 or something. And Spotify does that thing when it uses the algorithm to then play you a similar song. And so this was followed by Lavender by Marillion, and that was the highlight of that song. Perhaps.
I will say that I do see what you mean, Joz, about taking songs and not necessarily improving them, because I will say that with this song, as well as with The Barbarian, when you went to go and listen to the piano pieces, you're like, is it taking inspiration? Because I guess they're both so complex that it's like, I on the first few listens, I can't quite tell what they're doing. So with this song, I went to listen to this amazing pianist called Katia Bunyatishvili, and watching her play this on piano was amazing. And there I felt like, oh, I did enjoy the song, but just watching her play piano is amazing. And what I absolutely loved is that the top comment on that video was a woman called Jennifer Donovan saying, this is 140-year-old rock music, because that is what it sounds like. And when I listened before watching that video, I wrote, it almost has a B-52s-esque beginning, which was not what I was expecting. And I thought, oh, this sounds a bit like an Eastern European folk inspired thing. So when I saw it was Mussorgsky, I was like, aha, tick. I liked the madness and speed of the synth, bass and drums, but and the tempo change that I don't think happens in the piano piece, but I would say the piano piece is as good, if not better. So I do see what you mean there, but I think if I hadn't had the piano piece, I would have just been like, yep, good song, not as good as some of the others. But so Fran, the ultimate question, ELP, overrated or underrated?
Oh, they're very overrated. I mean, we haven't discussed how many albums they sold, have we?
No, it is. I also wrote that down. 48 million, right?
And that's in less than 10 years, really, isn't it? I mean, their career was based in 1970 to 1978. So in 8 years, they shifted 48 million albums. This band were playing to massive, massive audiences. And the fact that I couldn't name one song, and I don't even mind that genre, it is a bit crazy, you know. So for me, definitely an overrated band. And yeah, as Josh says, bands like this taint the word prog rock. So Babs?
For me, not overrated at all. I enjoyed the first 2 songs so much. So much. I was like, God, I've really got to get into this. And I think their personality is clouding the music. That's also what I've heard as well, which is totally understandable. But it did make me think, like, you know, why do people like other rock showmanship and not this? People like excess, people like especially like you were saying, Fran, who like metal and other things. Why do people have a particular problem with this? And it's precisely because I only knew Lucky Man, that I was like, well, I don't know this other kind of weirder shit, and now I want to get into the weirder shit. So, and also they have 833,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, which is less than the underrated band that we're discussing.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah, despite selling way more albums. So I'm not gonna say they're underrated, but no, I'm not gonna say they're overrated. No, thank you, Joz. I don't think that was your intention.
Great,
I had a
fan.
lovely time, and when my dad brings me,
I don't love them, but if they become a gateway drug for you to discover all the other prog that I think is great, then I'll be very happy to have passed them on to you.
Yeah. Like basically, I need my mum. I know Genesis and I know Pink Floyd from my mum quite well, but that's kind of it on the prog front. I'm looking forward to kind of it becoming, you know, The Barbarian becoming like my song on repeat, and then when you finally get to that moment where you know what's next, that is quite satisfying. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've never got to that point with them. I think that's the mad thing. Like, I've listened to them so many times and listened to them a lot when I was younger and stuff, and the only couple of songs that I actually know well enough to be like, oh, I know what's coming out are Carnival 9 and Lucky Man, and From the Beginning is a beautiful song. I really like that. Okay. And all the others are still in the place of being like, this baffles me when I listen to it, which might mean I've not put enough effort in.
But I would say to both of you and to all our listeners, I'll try and remember to link to this in the show notes. Go and listen to the original classical pieces of Bartók and Mussorgsky, because that was pretty incredible. When you see someone who can memorize such a complicated piece and is playing it with such emotion, it was very satisfying. So I think that also elevated it for me, knowing the origins and seeing that where, you know, the origins are.
What I did think regarding those Spotify stats is it because all the ELP fans
own the albums.
are too old for Spotify, basically.
Yeah. I think they've not lasted. But
they're probably vinyl heads as well, right? And they're like, or even like they have it on CD, so they don't. You know, why would they go and listen to it on Spotify?
But yeah, I guess we should mention how the band ended quite sadly. Like Emerson and Lake both died in 2016. Emerson took his own life.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
Yeah, a mix of basically in the 90s. He got
arthritis in his fingers.
Yeah, and he could barely play
anymore.
That's awful.
That and financial issues, and then Greg died of cancer. So yeah, they are just P.
Thanks for bringing the mood down.
Unfortunately.
They also a lighter fact about ELP, specifically to do with the P. Carl Palmer left Emerson, Lake and Palmer for a little bit, and that left them for a while having to find another drummer. But they decided that they had to find a drummer whose surname began with P because everyone already knew them as ELP. So they replaced him with a guy called Powell was his surname. I can't remember his first name.
Cozy.
But for a while they were called Emerson, Lake and Powell, specifically because that was their criteria, was we have to find a great drummer whose surname begins with P.
That is absolutely hilarious and childish. Like, I can imagine them being like, right, I've got a good drummer, but his name is Smith. Like, can you not change your name by deed poll?
Do you like music and do you like podcasts? Chances are you like music podcasts. Take this one for example, Pick a Disc. I'm Matt Latham, and every fortnight a guest comes on to Pick a Disc to talk about an album for any reason that they want to. They'll talk about the album as a whole, we talk about songs, we talk about any personal stories about the album, and if they've ever seen the band live, and all sorts of other crazy tangents. And if at any point any of that made you want to listen to Pick a Disc, then you can find us on your podcast apps of choice or on the Facebooks and Twitters and Instagram under Pick a Disc. We're also on the We Made This Podcast Network on WeMadeThisNetwork.com and on Twitter at @we_made this. Goodbye.
Underrated.
Welcome back to part 2, and we're discussing Joz's underrated pick, which is...
I have chosen Marillion as my underrated pick for the prog rock genre, because I feel like they're more or less universally known as a joke band. I've seen them kind of used as a punchline a lot in things, and I think it does them a disservice, and I think it's unfair. I think a lot of people also don't realize that they still exist. They've been making really good albums all the way up to there was one last year which I really love, but I think they came out at a weird time. Like their first album was in 1983, which was a good 10 years after prog had started being unfashionable, basically, and a lot of the big prog bands had kind of had to turn into stadium rock type pop acts in order to survive. So Genesis had gone very radio friendly, and Yes had gone very radio friendly. And a lot of that was going on in prog because essentially punk had killed it. And then Marillion came along 10 years later, basically sounding exactly like Peter Gabriel era Genesis. That was their sort of early stuff. It was very long songs, very similar vocal mannerisms. Fish, who was the lead singer of Marillion, dressed a lot like Peter Gabriel and did the same sort of makeup of painting himself like a flower and things. So I think people looked at that and then went, well, this is just a band pretending to be a band that we thought was silly a decade ago. So why would any of us treat any of this with any kind of respect? So I think they've been kind of written off like that. But I think they're brilliant. I think they're absolutely brilliant. I discovered them through Lavender and Kayleigh, which were their two big pop hits in the mid-80s. I think Lavender was used in Nighty Night. It's often used as a kind of song to accompany like a big silly dream sequence because it sounds so over the top and ridiculous. And I loved it and went and investigated a bunch more. And then I ended up seeing them live at a festival in 2010 called High Voltage, which was specifically for prog and classic rock acts. And I just loved them. I absolutely loved them. And it was one of those few things where you see a band and then go, I'm going to go and listen to everything they've done because I really enjoyed that. And they have a very special place in my heart to this day. They are ridiculous, but I'm very fond of them.
Are you Team Fish or Team Steve Hogarth?
I really like them both. I think Hogarth is a bit cringy as a person. He's one of those prog rock singers who thinks he's a lot cooler than he is. There's a lot of kind of leather jackets and long dyed black hair and kind of smouldering looks to camera and stuff. And it's all, I kind of wish he'd drop all that and just be a bit more normal. Fish, I think, is a much more kind of like down to earth, fun, silly guy. I think they're both really great vocalists. And the two bands are very different, really. Like when Fish is around, it's all very kind of flamboyant and a bit over the top. And then when Hogarth is there, it's a bit more earnest and it sounds a bit more like kind of contemporary, slightly prog rock stuff like Muse or whatever. So they're very different bands tonally, but I really like both of them. I think just the band themselves are really talented, and I really like listening to whatever they do, whatever tone it ends up sitting in. Fish is more fun. Fish stuff is more fun.
I think Fish was on Buzzcocks, so as a young person.
Was he?
Yes, I think I remember him being pretty cool. So, Babs, a penny for your thoughts on Marillion.
Well, my thoughts were very dry in money because, I knew them as the band who did Kayleigh and were probably British. Then you do, a bit of research and you're like, oh, I do remember hearing about a guy called Fish, but I didn't know he was from this band. And I had no idea that they had these two quite distinct eras. I think also a band with some wild album covers that we'll get into. I hope so. I had no idea that I think Wikipedia said they were they're the most commercially successful neo-progressive rock band of the 1980s. And I was like, what is that genre? What have they done beyond Kayleigh? I'm extremely intrigued. And I had no idea as well that they were kind of pioneers in crowdfunding as well. They were one of the earliest bands to do it. So I was like, okay, well, this is at the very least going to be interesting because I can understand that, people might say that they're an overrated band or have an overrated hit for Kayleigh. But given that I knew absolutely nothing else, that I came in also, ready to learn. Fran?
Yeah, I think my brother had Now 5, which has Kayleigh on it, and I adored it. So I, like Jaws, I knew Kayleigh and Lavender, and that was it. And I knew that my cousin, who was a lot older than me, was into Marillion, and he was not the coolest guy in the world. So I think that put me off. I was aware of that Marillion were one of the first bands to sort of go online, but then I thought, but is that because nobody wants to sign Marillion as well? Is that what happened there? But I paid money to watch a documentary. I became a Marillion Patreon so I could watch a documentary on Marillion, and then I found out that it wasn't actually on the band; it was on the band's festival. Or
the Marillion weekend.
But ATP, but for Marillion when.
Oh wow!
So for the past 20 years, and this happens all around the world. They will basically find, like a Butlins or something, and then they have 3,000 fans, and they have a whole weekend designed for Marillion. So it will be a different album per night. In the daytime, there'll be quizzes. There will be. They even allow people to go on stage and take the place of another member. So a guy will be playing drums in his favourite Marillion song, and it's bonkers, but I guess it's how they fund themselves, and they do fine. I think in 2022 they had number 2 album in the UK, which is
number 2.
I mean, yes, it's 2022. I probably meant 1,000 sales.
Yeah,
but it's not bad. So I mean, it's crazy watching that documentary, and Steve Hogarth is sat in a throne. And he really means it when he performs. Yeah, it's so much like pantomime, and and he's got dyed long hair. Around. Like the other members, they don't give a shit what they look like.
Yeah, they're quite chilled out.
Yeah, they're just guys. It's Hogarth, sat doing his art and the thing, and eyeliner. So it's quite funny to watch.
But I think they have built an amazing thing with their fan base, because they started all this about 20 years ago. And I think it was because they lost their record deal and they needed to crowdfund their next album so that they could record something. And they've now, so much stuff online now is about building Patreons and building kind of direct relationships with your audience. And it feels like they were doing that before anybody else had cottoned onto it, really. They also, they gave away one of their albums. They released it on a torrent site the day before it was released. And when you downloaded it, you got a video from them saying, thanks so much for downloading our album. We know that when people torrent music, it's because they really love the music. It's not because they're thieves or whatever. Wow. So if you've enjoyed this, please buy our merch or please come and see us on tour. We're not angry with you for torrenting it, but we'd just love you to support us. So they just go that extra bit to understand the mindset of a fan and to go, what can we do for the fans that helps us? Because obviously they're not popular enough to actually, I think, sustain themselves through sales. So they've just figured out other ways of doing it through, I think they did have a top 10 hit in 2004, but purely because they released something like 10 different mixes of the single and then asked all their fans to buy all 10, so that their single ended up in the charts just because they built this relationship with people, and then people went, well, I like these guys. So I think they're really smart about that and very kind of community focused in the way they've built their brand.
Was that also the album where it was technically eligible for the top 30, but in the end it wasn't because they included stickers in it? It's what I read. Yeah, this is Marbles, right? So because it was packaged with a couple of stickers, it was deemed ineligible. So I'm like, really? Would that happen now? That's wild.
That's a shame. Yeah.
My favourite fact about Marillion reading up on the band was that they got asked before Queen to do the Highlander soundtrack.
Oh,
wow.
And to this day, it's the biggest mistake of
turned it down.
No, the manager did it on their behalf because they were recording their third album, and he didn't want to interrupt them with this weird film called The Highlander.
Was that when Fish was still in the band, and therefore they'd be
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that would have been it, like 1985. So yeah, peak Marillion. They just had those 2 hits. What a different world we'd have, maybe.
Yeah. What could have been?
What could have been? So, what's your first track, Joz?
The first track is called, and I'm afraid I still don't really know how to pronounce the name of this song. I think it's Slange Mavav.
I think it's Slanshema because it's Irish, right? Pronouncing the letters.
Irish, yeah.
Why would we do that?
I think it means I think it just means cheers or something.
Yeah.
So this is from their 4th album. I thought I'd choose 2 from the Fish era and then 3 from the Hogarth era because the Hogarth era is longer. This was from their last album, and it's kind of at a point where they'd sort of moved away from doing very long prog epics and were better at doing short, kind of punchy anthemic songs, sort of pop songs. But I think they were still very good at working the atmosphere of prog into things. This is from a kind of concept album called Clutching at Straws, which was Fish kind of narrating his own coming to terms with the fact that the touring lifestyle was really bad for him and he was going to die of a drug overdose very soon. This song, I think, just builds really nicely. It's got it doesn't really have a chorus, but there's a thing at the end that it kind of builds up to, that like Take Me Away bit that I really, really enjoy. And it's kind of sequenced in the album as it leads into the kind of final few songs in a really nice way.
Oh yeah, I didn't know the song, but it feels like this should have been a single to me.
Yeah, I think it would work.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a band who are confident. You know, like this is Fish leading out his troops. There's power chords. There's that whole "This is how the story so far. This is the story."
Yeah.
Punching the air. I love. Is it Rothery's like clean finger picking style?
That guitar part is really nice.
The powerhouse vocals of Fish. This is glorious Marillion, and it sounds like this could have been on the Top Gun soundtrack. I can imagine like a jet.
It's got a real kind of like cheesy.
So far. So I know it's not cool at all, but I actually really enjoyed it. Perhaps.
You said they were confident. Are they too confident? I think so. It started off and I was like, oh, this is a bit epic. It gets a bit better in the verse. I quite like the prominent bass. I have to say, especially the bassist is incredible. The bass lines are all brilliant. Incredible in this song, and the drums too, just like the drums in the LP. But to me, it sounds quite cheesy, and it sounds to me like a parody of an epic keyboard song, especially the way Fish is singing, like I am singing a meaningful song. It did make me laugh, but not in a way that I enjoyed, I'm afraid. I thought it was a bit Meatloaf-esque in style and vibe as well.
Yeah, it's very Meatloaf, actually.
But
would you class that as a negative?
Yeah, not for me.
Wow.
Not for me. I'm too cynical. Although I think I would go to that Meatloaf musical that people were talking about. I think that I'm sure is a bit of fun, but yeah.
I saw that musical, and when I got home from it, he died. He died while I was watching it. It felt terrible.
What did you do?
I know. What a shame. Yeah, I think Marillion sits in a really similar world to Meatloaf, actually. And again, I don't know where my attitude to it is in terms of like, I don't like it in a kitsch novelty way. I genuinely like it, but I'm also very aware, like the fact that it's so stupid is part of what I enjoy about it. I think
that's healthy. Like I like to see humor in music, even in music that I like. But here, it feels a bit self-important. Like, it just... Fish, to me, sounds like he's like, I am the king of the fucking lads. You've got to listen to me sing this Irish song, even though I'm Scottish, that I didn't really understand. I thought the lyrics were fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. A hand held over a candle in angst-fueled bravado. A carbon trail scores a moist, stretched palm. I mean, I could go on. Like, really, really good. And I was reading how Fish was really inspired by Joni Mitchell when it came to lyrics, which I thought was quite interesting. I think Hogarth as well called her one of his biggest influences.
Wow.
But yes, I was like, oh, this is not what I expected. And I'm intrigued to see where the rest of the playlist goes. It's not all this, though. It's not all this.
So what's your next pick, Joz?
Next pick was Kayleigh, which I included. I probably didn't need to include it, but I thought because it's their biggest hit, if neither of you knew it at all, I thought it was worth putting on there because that's kind of why they're still known today. I think it's a great pop song. I think it's one of my favourites.
Yeah, it's a killer pop anthem, and it spawned 1,000 girls called Kayleigh. And I even looked up, and in 2005, 96% of the women called Kayleigh were born after 1985.
Wow.
So basically, Fish, and if you go on the comments on YouTube, there's so many people called Kayleigh going, "Oh, named after this. Oh, named after
Which is hilarious because if you read about it, it's about a woman. Well, it's about lots of different women, but it's about a woman called Kay, like Kay. But her middle name was Lee, and he was like, "Oh, that sounds a bit better."
Yeah. I'd heard one story that he deliberately, so it was about this person, Kay, first name Kay, middle name Lee, and the reason he changed the spelling was because he didn't want her to find out that it was about her, so he changed it to the name Kayleigh all as one word. But I find that a really funny story because if she'd heard it, she would have she'd go, "Oh, that's about me because that's my name."
Yeah, it's not
the idea of spelling it differently doesn't really change anything. It's still the same name.
I think the song is brilliant. I mean, for me, it sounds like Simple Minds joined by Mark Knopfler. I find the guitar playing very much like Dire Straits. My favourite YouTube quote was a guy put on here, "I can't believe that they wrote the song, they played it, and they sung it. Incredible."
Wow. These guys were a band?
Whoa.
Oh my God.
So yeah. Kayleigh is definitely a win for me.
I think this is a win too. I really like this song. Like, it's definitely overplayed, but it's beautiful. I always like to analyze kind of songs that are popular because it's just one of those songs that's been, I was born in 87. This has been in my consciousness since I was born, I would say. I love the woozy synths and the bass line guiding. I really like how Fisher's singing in the verses is really controlled to then really let go in the chorus, and how it shifts from him being like, "Sorry" to "and you broke mine," and even the bitter end. Love it. It's really good, like, because there's that contrast there where he's so controlled. And Fran, I wrote, given our old episode, if Crowded House sounded more like this, I would like them more. Because Joss, we did an episode on Crowded House where Fran tried to convince me they weren't overrated and unfortunately failed.
Right.
But why Crowded House? I mean,
that's what it thought. That's what it made me think of. I was like, oh, this is Crowded House-esque, maybe a bit more keyboardy than Crowded House. But I was like, oh, if it was a bit more like that, because this Kayleigh is not my genre of music, but I can't deny it's a great song. But yeah, some facts that I enjoyed was that the woman who's featured in the promotional video ended up marrying Fish, this German woman, Tamara Naui. And I didn't realise that Kayleigh was one of those number 2 hits, because that was its peak position, because it was kept from number 1 by a version of You'll Never Walk Alone, which was done by this supergroup after a Bradford City Stadium fire. Because I always think of Vienna by Ultravox, but I didn't realise Kayleigh by Marillion is another kind of big number 2 one. So
what's your next pick, Joz?
The next pick is Hard as Love, which is the first of the Hogarth era on there. I've included this because my friend Jack, who I mentioned earlier, who got me into prog rock, this is sort of the only song from the Hogarth era that he likes, I think, because it's the only time that they rock out to any extent. They very rarely do the kind of crunchy guitar riff thing. It's normally much more about kind of either about pop hooks or about kind of atmospheres and textures or whatever. And this is much more of a kind of actual rock song. I think they're really good at it. I think they managed to work in that area really well, while also keeping it kind of proggy, in that it goes through different movements and there are quieter bits and then it builds to a bigger ending and stuff. So I think they're really good at kind of looking back at classic prog and then thinking what elements of this can we use while still anchoring it around something that's kind of a cool hook. that people are going to enjoy. So I really like that about it.
And this would have been as they were slipping down the charts, I guess.
Yeah, this is at the point where nobody gives a shit anymore, sadly. So they did a couple of albums with Hogarth that I think still might have charted a bit, nowhere near on the same level. And I think around this point is where they sort of started going down into, well, we now just make albums for our fans, and that will be what we'll have to do from now on. But it's for an album called Brave, which is brilliant. It's a really brilliant album.
I had never heard this before. It's got like whispery vocals. When I think of prog, I do think of whispering for some bizarre reason.
Oh yeah,
it's one of the only genres you can get away with a whisper, and I'm not a big fan of whisper. It's just quite a shift from the beastly power of Fish's vocals. I do like the tender tones. I like the delicate guitar and keyboard to play, and that reminded me of Meatloaf, and I don't mind a bit of meat. But yeah, when he suddenly delivers that, it makes you hungry, and it's like big gear chains of organs coming. It's like a proper like rock song. But yeah, it's hard as love. Is that a joke? Is that supposed to be?
Oh God knows.
If you look at the lyrics,
I have no idea what it's all about.
If you look at the lyrics, it literally, this is what he says: it makes you hungry and it makes you high, it makes you suffer and it makes you cry, it makes you panic, etc. You know, I could go on, and then he says, "Love can be as hard as 6-inch nails, baby. Nothing else has ever been as hard as love." So I think love is hard, guys.
Really hard. Lyrically, he's not necessarily operating on quite the same level as Fish yet. But he's given it a go.
But when he's talking about his hard love, he does begin to wail a bit too much for me, and that's a bit off-putting. So yeah, so it has some decent moments, but not as good as the Fish songs I've heard previously on the playlist.
When it started, I thought it sounded like Bon Jovi, and I thought, oh no, oh dear, we're back here again. It gets a bit more interesting once the bass and keyboards come in, where it's not just his vocals and guitars. But this one, kind of in a way, I would say almost as much as the Emerson, Lake and Palmer songs, I couldn't quite get a grasp on it, because there are bits that are quite interesting. Like I really like it when the guitar departs and the strings come in, almost sounding like the strings from Your Woman, I thought. But the moment it goes back to anthemic rock and Steve shouting, I was like, oh no, this is not for me.
You didn't think he sounded really cool?
I thought he sounded a bit, again, like self-serious. But I went through a lot of emotions both times. Like I didn't out and out hate it, but I was just like, oh, I can't quite get a grasp on this. But there's maybe a few too many things that I don't like. But love is hard, guys. So maybe it's too hard for me.
It's good that he got that message out there at least, because nobody would have known otherwise.
Do you think Steve has a big ego, but because Marillion aren't as successful as they were, he can't quit to go solo? Is that what's happened? If he was the lead singer in the mid-80s, would he have gone solo?
Oh yeah, he'd be off to it. Well, he has done some solo projects, which I've listened to. He's released an album called Ice Cream Genius.
Good title.
And the front cover of it is Steve Hogarth holding up an ice cream cone and sort of raising his eyebrows like that. And I was surprised by it, because everything else about him is so self-serious and kind of like, I'm a very cool lead singer of a rock band, that I don't know why he chose that to be his title or cover image. But he's sort of, he's kind of flirted with the idea of trying to go solo. But I think he probably knows that the thing he's attached to is that's what's successful, is the fact that they were successful in the 80s. So he kind of needs to be involved with them. I do find him difficult. I really like his voice, and I really like their work with him. I don't think he's a great lyricist, but I do find his vibe quite difficult to deal with. Occasionally they'll post Instagram things and they'll all be, like you said, they're such like sweet, down-to-earth, gentle old men. And then occasionally Steve Hogarth will kind of like swan through the room and shout and do stuff with his arms and then yell at everyone. And it is quite difficult to watch.
I couldn't bring myself to hearing him sing Kayleigh or Lavender. But
he doesn't. When you go and see him live, when they do the Fish era songs, he just holds the microphone out to the audience and makes them do it.
That's quite interesting.
Which, in a way, is, I don't know if that's him trying to be like, oh, I can't do Fish, I've got too much respect for Fish. I think he disrespects that stuff, and he knows that the audience are there to see that. So he's like, go on, then you guys sing it. Which is so annoying, because he's like, well, you're the lead singer of Marillion, mate. So sing the Marillion songs that we want to see. So I think he's got a hell of an ego on him, and a bit of a problem with the fact that his band were more famous before he was in it.
He hasn't re-recorded it, his own version of Kayleigh.
Don't think so. No, don't think they've ever officially revisited it like that. They always, and they sing very few of them when they do live shows. I think they do more of them at the Marillion weekends. But if you go and see them on tour, he'll only do about 2 Fish songs, and then the rest will be will be his stuff.
I mean, he sounds very different to Fish because I'm trying to find it now, but I can't. But basically, Fish was very much like, no, I'm not going to go and sing Kayleigh to make money kind of thing. And he seems to be quite a like hardcore socialist as well. And yeah, this sounds very different.
Yeah, he seems like a really decent gent, I think.
So what's your next pick?
The next song is called Don't Hurt Yourself, which is from Marbles, from the album we mentioned earlier. This is one of my favourite songs of theirs from the Hogarth era. I think it's really, really nice. I think, again, it does that thing of like, musically, I think all of them are really great. And I think the sound of the guitars on this and the sound of the bass and the arrangements of all of it are really very well orchestrated and very well played. But I think at the heart of it, it's just a really great song. I think it's, I think lyrically he's better on this one than on some of his other ones where he sort of lets himself down a bit. I think it's probably one of my favourites of the modern era, of the Hogarth era.
I did put, like, obviously the lyrics about, you know, don't dwell on the past, you know, like your lead singer leaving the band.
Get over it.
But I think it's got decent melody and guitars, but it sounds just like Constant Cravings by K.D. Lang.
Oh.
And once that was in my mind, I can't not hear this without hearing K.D. Lang singing it.
That'd be why I thought it was such a good song.
But I did notice that, like, they don't seem to have any backing vocals. I couldn't really hear anything. And like,
no, I don't think they ever do.
But yeah, I wasn't a big fan of the guitar outro. But obviously it makes sense. It's Marillion. And also the phrase "the open road." You only ever hear it in songs or in films. I've never met anyone who ever says the phrase, "Yeah, I'm just gonna hit the open road." Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think this was like also like a hit single for them in a way. I believe it was like maybe top 10.
I think it might have been a single off the back of that album. It wasn't the top 10 one where they released the 10 different versions of it, but I think it was another single they released from that album that did all right.
Babs?
Yeah, another one where I was just confused with this one because it started and I was like, oh no, it's a ballad with a slide guitar. Then it goes a bit Britpoppy and I was like, oh, that's interesting. They're kind of keeping up with the times. And then it went into a bit more country and I was like, okay, again, this isn't really my kind of genre. But there's a great bass. There's a nice keyboard solo about 2/3 in, and I totally agree with you, Jules. I was nodding along when you were saying the guitar, like every single guitar in this, the slide, the rhythm, the bass, is doing fantastic stuff.
He's brilliant, that guitarist, Steve Rothery. I think he's quite kind of Gilmour-esque in terms of his influences, but I think he also sort of has a distinct tone of his own, and I think he can do a lot of different things really well.
But I think this is the problem with this song. I think I maybe felt that a bit with the previous one, with this one even more, where there's so much going on, and it doesn't settle on anything long enough. So it'd be like, oh, that's an interesting instrument. Nope, it's gone. Oh, that's surprising. Nope, it's gone. So when I listened to it again, I appreciated it a bit more. Despite it, not really being my cup of chai, I wrote. But I think it does suffer from a bit like everything but the kitchen sink thrown at it. I think they're trying to make a country Britpop prog song and it doesn't quite work for me, and God, the lyrics are so earnest. Like, it really reminds me, Fran, of the Irish entry for Eurovision this year, Joz, where it was basically
what did they do?
They didn't qualify. It was a very earnest song where it was like, basically we'll all be freaks together tonight, we are one, but it rang hollow, right? It didn't ring true. Right. And I think with this as well, something else will grow and take its place, the brand new car, scrap metal in a junkyard. I mean, I think it's about kind of like, obviously don't kill yourself, but I was like, this makes me want to kill myself more than not. So I don't think it's doing its process. Steve, just calm down. I'm sure, like, I didn't watch any music videos, like on any go and look at any YouTube videos, but I can be sure that if you go on YouTube, there will be comments and people being like, oh, this song saved my life, this song really helped me. I'm sure it has, but for me, not for this cynic.
Not a favorite.
I couldn't see any music videos for any of these Hogarth songs. But yeah, the YouTube comments are, this is the best band ever.
You're right, yeah.
But then again, that's every YouTube comment on every single band.
Yeah, same guy.
So what's your last pick?
The final song is one of the more recent ones. It's called Sounds That Can't Be Made and is the title track from a 2012 album. So not that recent, actually. God, that's sad. So this was the title. I think this was the first new Marillion album that came out since I got into them. So I remember at the time being very excited of like, oh, this is that band that I've spent the last couple of years discovering and going back to learn about. The album's great. It has a sort of 17-minute like attempt at metal, which they'd never done before. And it's probably one of their worst like lyrical efforts, that one, because it's called Gaza and it's Steve Hogarth's attempt to talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And it's a complicated issue that he doesn't necessarily handle that well, as you might suspect. But this is the title track from it. I think the thing I really like about Marillion is that it's that pop sensibility thing of like having an ear for, I think, a really good tune, but then being able to ornament it with stuff that's much more anthemic and much more bombastic and much more silly and over the top. And I think there is a cheesiness to all of it, but somehow that's kind of in my wheelhouse, I think, musically. So this one sort of starts as quite a cheesy love song and then builds to something that's much more kind of like guitar solos and spacey and epic. And I think it just does that, the range of what I think Marillion are good at. I think it does it really well.
Yeah, this seems to be more synth-led than other tracks.
Yeah. They've done a lot of guitar stuff, but their keyboardist is great as well.
And I think the Steve played the keyboard as well, I believe.
No, it's Mark Kelly plays. Steve Hogarth plays a bit of keyboard,
yeah.
But Mark Kelly is the sort of lead synth guy.
So I thought this felt a bit more Celtic. Like his voice seems to be a bit more croaky, almost like the Waterboys in delivery. This felt more prog, obviously with the different changes and styles, and but then after like 5 minutes, there's like this climbing like guitar solo, and But the lyrics didn't work for me. Like, is it like I want to play you a sound that you can never hear, or those sort of lyrics that doesn't mean anything?
It was about music, right? Like sounds
really?
that can't be made, as in because it's music that hasn't been composed yet. Although there is a bit about the Northern Lights, which I thought was quite nice. But yeah, I wasn't sure.
He very often just shoehorns in references to twinkling lights in various ways. If you ever do a kind of, you listen to all of Hogarth's stuff all the way through, there'll be so many references to like Christmas lights or the Aurora Borealis or glowing lights or floating colours. He's obsessed with that. And I think he thinks it's just something that like, well, that'll sound nice.
I was going to ask, does he have synesthesia or something like that?
Maybe, yeah, there is that sense of like, I don't know whether what it's trying to say is the idea of like making music that can't actually be heard, or like whether he kind of sees it or feels it in a different way. Mm-hmm. That's sort of what it associates with for me, but I don't know whether he's just throwing words on the paper or whether there's anything more to it. But it feels kind of synesthetic what it's trying to talk about.
I just felt a bit cringy because he says, caressing you every day. If only you could hear them. Sounds like can't be made. Sounds like can't be made. No, it ain't just in your head, babe. It's inside you. Dig it out. Dig it out. Okay.
Love that rendition, Fran.
Yeah, quite intense. Spooky.
So yeah, that kind of put me off. So but wasn't for me. So Babs?
I don't have Spotify anymore, but I still listen to our guests' playlist on Spotify. And when it started, I actually thought it was a Spotify advert because it went in such a different direction. Then I was like, oh no, it's just something a bit different because he's kind of talk singing. I would actually say that I think this was my second favourite song after Kayleigh. Once I was like, okay, like I see that Joss has really tried to put in songs that don't sound the same at all, which is really great. And it's always nice to see a band that doesn't sound the same on every album. And yeah, here there was enough that I really like, the lead guitar hook, the strings, when it slows down and then builds up again, and again, the wacky synth solo, they're not bad at that. Although I did read about the Gaza song, and it's quite funny that you said, Joss, that it didn't sound good, because the way it's framed on Wikipedia, I think it's Steve himself who's like, I talked to Palestinian children, Israeli diplomats, NGOs, and like I really tried hard, but if you're saying it doesn't come across well, oh dear.
It's actually not bad, to be honest. I think it's the idea of that guy trying to like weigh in and be like, I'll fix this with a 17-minute prog epic. This is what I'll do. I think it's such a misguided attempt to explore any of it. It's actually, I really like it as a song. It's just the effort to try and make a prog song about that is a little bit like, well, I don't know if it'll help, but thank you for trying.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't think I'm going to save this one to my kind of playlist, but it was the most enjoyable song that I didn't know yet, I thought.
So, Babs, I will ask you the question: Marillion, over or underrated?
I'm really sorry, Joss, but no, I don't. I think they're underrated, especially when you see that.
Sure.
You're not expecting this twist. They have over 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify, which
they're actually
really
doing all right.
surprised me. I think Steve Hogarth's voice, I'm really not a fan of. I think that did put off a lot of it, and just because it sounds too rock. And I guess some people might find that interesting. I was going to ask, like, what the hell is neo prog? And I guess it's prog that has other elements into it, and I'm sure that element is what a lot of people enjoy about it, but I don't so much. But I mean, I'm glad that I now know, that they aren't just the Kayleigh band, and they're not, as you say, a joke band, and I can really appreciate a band that really kind of goes with the times and tries different genres and just keeps reinventing. And yeah, I mean, what's the Marillion Weekender called? Is it the Marillion Weekender?
Just called the Marillion Weekend, I think.
I mean, Fran, it reminded me a bit of what Chris Oddy is doing from 6x7. So a previous guest of ours, Jaws, who he goes and records music in a studio and basically invites his friends to come with him to see him record, and they have dinner together and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's so obvious to me that this is kind of the future of music, and this are doing it first. If you are that way inclined, I think you have to be that way inclined. And unfortunately, if you just want to kind of shut yourself off in your studio, it's not going to work so much. So yeah, I was really glad to find out more about them and listen to the music. But I'm going to go and listen to Kayleigh again for sure, but I don't think I'm going to go listen to any of the other songs, I'm afraid. Sorry, Joz.
No, fair enough. They're not for everyone.
But Fran?
Well, I would say the Fish era, they are underrated, because I did have a listen to Clutching at Straws. I really enjoyed, is it Incommunicado?
Yeah, that's a great song.
Yeah, and I just like I remember seeing Fish interviewed, and he came across really charismatic and likable. It's horrible to think I prefer them because the lead singer is more likable, but unfortunately that's the case.
No, I think that's fair. I think I agree with you as well. I think like I saw him live as well, and he's a really great presence live. He's a really good storyteller, and he kind of engages with you, and he feels quite genuine, and he feels like there's no pretense at all. Whereas every time I've seen Marillion, the Hogarth performance is so mannered and so affected. I think that's a real barrier for people. For some reason, it's not for me. I'm able to kind of like switch it. Like I think it, but it doesn't stop me from kind of engaging with the music. Or maybe it does more of a job of shifting it into that element of like, well, I'm now enjoying this on a slightly ironic level because this guy's so ridiculous that they kind of become a thing to enjoy in a silly way rather than in a purely kind of genuine way. But I do think Fish is a much nicer, more likable frontman.
I do wonder whether, as a comedian, so I know you were saying you have maybe not a straightforward relationship with comedy either. Thinking that something is funny doesn't necessarily mean it's bad in your world, right? Like, just because it's funny doesn't mean you can't enjoy it and also take it seriously, because that's what you do with the best comedy. And I think there are way too many snobbish music fans out there ruining it for everyone. The amount of conversations I had with people about, the abomination that's Eurovision, and I'm like, I kind of want to send like the metal songs in Eurovision to some people and just be like, what do you think of this song? And they go, that's good. I'm like, it wasn't Eurovision, you fucking idiot. As with what was the song that was very with Salant Chamar, just because something is very kind of epic and a bit silly doesn't mean it's bad necessarily.
I think that's the thing, because my girlfriend hates Steve Hogarth. She doesn't listen to Marillion at all and has no interest in them, because all I've shown her is footage of Steve Hogarth being unbearable. And every time she even sees a picture of him, she goes, I just can't have anything to do with him. And I just find it very funny every time. I kind of, the idea of like this weird preening man who seems to think that he's still maybe in his mid-30s, even though he's pushing 60 or whatever. I think that's part of what I love about it. It's such a kind of like strange, cheesy world that they belong to that I just really like visiting there, really.
And I do find it a little bit Alan Partridge that everyone in the UK still thinks that Fish is the lead singer of his band as well. It's really great.
Nobody even knows this guy exists.
But I mean, I like you too, and obviously, Bono is not exactly the most liked singer. But maybe, I mean, are there some tracks you could send someone to get into the Hogarth era? Are there anything which is a bit more accessible?
I could give it a try. I could try and create more of a playlist.
The best of Hogarth.
Yeah. There's good stuff in
That's
there.
what you're going to make for your girlfriend on her birthday, right? Best of Hogarth.
Yeah.
With a CD with a picture of him on there. Yeah. Yeah.
The sounds you can never hear. But yeah. So I like elements of Marillion. It's a genre that I'm on board with. But maybe with some different songs, I could be buying myself a weekend ticket to Butlins.
Yeah. See you there. I've never been, actually.
Speaking of Marillion, are there any tracks you'd like to offer to our audience as further listening?
If they want to hear more of the kind of early, like more pure prog stuff, there's a song called Grendel, which was another 17-minute song about the Grendel monster from Beowulf. And that kind of thing is the reason why everyone treats them as a silly joke band, because they were doing things like that for a while. I think it's fantastic, again, because if you enter it with cheesy nonsense in your mind, then you'll be fine. Incommunicado is another great song. That was sort of their last big single before Fish left. And there's a really good song called Tuck Song, which was a B-side on the back of Clutching at Straws. And I don't know why it was never released, because I think it's one of their best songs. But that one's really about the fact that I think Fish was talking about it and saying if he kept doing this, he just saw himself lying dead in a hotel room with surrounded by coke and with a dog licking his feet or something. And that song is about that. It's about like seeing what's coming and trying to get away from it. So that song's really great. And then for Hogarth stuff, there's a very silly song called Neverland, which they play every time they play live. It's a kind of big emotional epic, and every time they play it, Hogarth pretends to fly around the stage, which is, if you don't like him, unbearable. And if you're willing to go with the cheese of it, it's absolutely hilarious. So that one's worth a look.
I hope he can afford to have wires so he can actually fly over.
Yeah, one day they'll do another big crowdfunder, and then they'll be able to sort that out, I reckon.
What else do you have in the pipeline? If anything you'd like to plug or mention, or
what else is coming up? I'm doing some comedy workshops in London for people who are working on fringe shows and want to figure out kind of the themes of their fringe shows and things. So I think there'll be details of that will be coming out soon. And I'm finishing off a bunch of short films at the moment, which might be at film festivals or online later in the year. But if people go to my website, josnorris.co.uk, or follow me on Twitter, then they'll be able to find out all about those things and other things.
And what's your Twitter handle or Instagram?
It's at josnorris.
Well, thank you for finally bringing prog onto our podcast, Jos.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
May
it be the first of many. And I wonder if future guests, Fran, will be as respectful like Jos of not bringing in several 10+ minute ones. I don't know. I think the record so far, Fran put a British Sea Power song that was 17 minutes long, and I wanted to strangle him, but
yeah,
I don't want to strangle you.
That's
so
a lot to get through.
That's the win.
No, pleasure. There are some short ones out there within the genre. There's a few of them.
Yeah.
You got to seek them out.
Good, which is great. Bye.
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 Whoa, man, progtastic. That was Jos, and we really enjoyed discussing Marillion and Emerson at Lake and Palmer with him. And we're very happy that we picked some long songs, but it wasn't too bad. It could have been much worse, guys. It could have been much worse. But I know that one of our listeners, Lou in Sydney, has been requesting some prog rock, and who knows, we might do another episode in future. So if you would like to let us know what topics and genres and bands you'd like us to talk about, you can find us on Twitter at OUMusicPod. We're on Instagram at OverUnderatedMusicPod, and you can also email us like Lou did on overunderatedmusicpod@gmail.com. We hope the fingers on your hands aren't burnt out from guitar soloing too hard, and you haven't got calluses from those crazy keyboard solos either. Enjoy, rock out, peace out.